Away we go.
And I'm going to mute myself to get rid of the background noise.
We
Becky,
did.
it's good to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
We are now recording, folks. Hello, I am Charlie Winterbauer, co-chair of the Southeast Coastal Chapter of the Native Plant Society. And I'm going to give a very brief introduction to our speaker today because a full bio went out with my announcement. But here's the short introduction. Becky Skiba is from the NC Wildlife Commission. Becky Skiba has worked in environmental education since 2009. She has worked in the southeastern states of Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, and now North Carolina. Becky, the screen is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you everybody for having me here. I know that, Sunday, day of rest, you probably have some other fun activities you'd like to get to. So thanks so much for having me. And Charlie, you may have to give me a time, idea. I got my phone here next to me, but I get really excited about stuff like this, so I'll make it long. But if y'all have any questions as we go, I guess, feel free to ask. And if not, we can save them to the end. Totally up to you, whatever works best for you.
Well, let's try to keep it with the questions probably an hour.
Okay, gotcha. And I just want to let you know too, after this, I'm going to send a PDF of the whole presentation to Charlie and Michael so that they can distribute it to anybody that's interested in having that. And if you want kind of the handout, even as a Word document with the notes that I have for the slides, it should show up on the PDF document. That way you'll have it to review later if there's something that you really wanted to see. So,
great, thank you.
Yeah, and everybody can see my screen okay, the gardening for birds and wildlife. Is that coming up? Okay, perfect. Yeah, if that changes, please let me know. I've had some technical difficulties before. So one of the things I just want to kind of bring up is the biodiversity that we have here in the state of North Carolina. So there's about 1,300 species of fish, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and mollusks that can be found here in North Carolina. And about 200 of those are protected by state or federal endangered species laws. So a lot of that, as we were kind of chatting earlier, has to do with loss of habitat, loss of suitable habitat. So that can really be a big issue there. And we have about, let's see, when we talk about going native, some of the things that we really need to consider when we're trying to rewild our yard or just try to make it more home-like for different animals through different seasons, you just got to kind of ask yourself what you want to attract. But some of the very basic components of habitat are going to include, food and cover, space and a suitable arrangement, water, and a diversity of plants and structures. So, like for instance, here I've got and this is just really just edited in footage, but say I've got, everybody's seen bird feeders and it has like flanked by shrubs and trees, things of varying heights, a water source, and this makes it all really easy for animals to come in and use it. And some of the small steps that you can do to try to rewild your area, just one stage at a time, is you could start by replacing one non-native plant at a time. So giving wildlife something that they can actually use. Replacing monoculture grasses with native flowers or shrubs, grasses, or even edibles, or even bunches of them. Like I have in my background right now, blue stem, but you can buy at a lot of these native plant sales these really pretty, I think I had one that was like blue thunder, something, like all these different batches. And they're really nice to kind of, even if you have a fenced in yard, to add in as like a little corner area to help create a nice traveling corridor for wildlife or a place to hide from predators. So that's something that really helps out as well. And I know after the hurricane, some of us got some high winds and you probably had some downed trees or leaves or things like that. But if you have the space and you're able to, saving some of those snags and down logs, we'll go into it a little bit later about how that really helps all sorts of wildlife, species, not just birds. But another thing to kind of consider when you're thinking about how animals might best use your property is the next rain we have, which I don't know about you, but here is probably coming this evening. Look at the water drainage patterns in your yard and maybe think about how you might be able to maximize that for a nice area for wildlife to use, those collective pools for a water source, or how that might help you kind of plan out and arrange your yard for wildlife gardening. So some of the wildlife needs that we're thinking about, again, you want to think about what species you want to attract. Most people think of this in the inverse, and they're like, what do I not want? And I know for folks that grow gardens and things, deer are kind of high on that list. But when you're considering that, having a diverse number or species of plants is really going to add to the overall appeal of your habitat that you're creating. So think about what are the food sources it provides. Or do you have anything that produces nuts or seeds or fruits, nectar maybe for pollinators? All of these things are different food sources that are going to impact different species of wildlife, whether it be a pollinator, a mammal, a bird, insects in general. I mean, our bird species are extremely variable in their habits. So, dead trees, logs on the ground provide home for more than 400 species of birds, mammals, and amphibians. But if you take into account their food sources and what they're eating, that's really going to kind of change up who you expect to see coming through, especially during migrations versus resident species. So the way you want to arrange those different plants close to one another. So for folks that like to do pollinator gardens, they typically have some of your more of the ground cover, which we'll get into, and then they move up to things that are a little bit stockier. And then, as they move back, hopefully your vegetation is kind of growing in stratification so that once we have, some larvae or caterpillars here, they can go into some of the higher vegetation to hide so they're not all eaten, so that then they can mature into, metamorphose into butterflies or anything that they're trying to be to move to the next stage. So it's not all just like eaten immediately. So those are some things to think about too. And if you can add feeders and nest boxes, of course, that would help. But a really big thing is the addition of running water features. One, that'll help hopefully keep some mosquitoes down for you with that water constantly turning. But that fresh water, especially on these 90+ degree days with 110 heat index and all that jazz, you can't have enough of that available. So there you have, on Amazon, they have really cheap little, inserts you could put in your bird baths and things like that to help kind of keep water flowing. And they do a pretty good job. So those are just some things to consider when you are picking out some native plants or thinking about just how you use your space in general. And also, taking into account that, 96% of our land birds actually, feed insects to their young. Bears and others will actually look for soft mass foods, so like fruits and things like that, versus like hard mass in different seasons, more of the nuts and acorns and things to feed themselves, to fuel up for hibernation. So another thing to think about is that based on the season and animals' needs, like when wintertime, we switch to suet, right? It just puts a little bit more fat on them. But, in spring, they're going to want more fruits. They're going to want something that's more sugary, something that's going to really pop up that energy. So think about how your garden or your yard is going to respond seasonally. Is winter just a dead period, fall, nothing happening? Are you just the spring bloomers? So try to incorporate something that would cover every season if you can. And then another consideration is, do you want something that's evergreen or deciduous? It's nice to have a mix of both if you can, because then you're still providing, habitat, someplace for them to hide, a little bit of protection and shelter. And also leaf cover, which is something that's going to attract insects as well. So if you can think about when you're buying your plants, including like early or late fruiting species, plants that do produce seeds in the wintertime are also really beneficial to a lot of wildlife, because that's when they're really struggling. There's not as many options out there, and that's when the birds and the mammals and everything are competing with one another to find a food source, and typically they're going after the same one. So thinking back to, again, evergreen or deciduous, is it annual or perennial? What are your goals for your area, and what do you want to see blooming at different seasons? That's going to be a big part in this, because it is your yard, you want to enjoy it. But if you're going to make it available for wildlife, we kind of have to think about how it's set up. So some of us may live in a new development. Some of us may live in a condo, an apartment, maybe an older, more established neighborhood. And so this picture here is actually trying to show you the 5 different layers that your yard can actually provide. So the very first and most important layer is going to be your lawn and grass cover. And of course, that's also going to include components like leaf litter, which is great area for, overwintering of certain insect species like fireflies and others that would also provide good food sources. So if you're thinking about that grass, if you have some kind of a monoculture grass, or I have this stuff I'm just trying to kill off that it grows horizontally and puts these, it's just, they're like tentacles and I can't get rid of it fast enough, but trying to replace that. Or, you know, I know there's a big movement for people to do a lawnless yard. So something you don't have to mow, a no-mow area where it's basically just kind of covered in a wild spot here. The herbaceous ground cover is something else. So something that's just slightly a little bit taller. This could be some of your pollinator plants, something that's nice and leafy, even clover. Clover is a great plant, especially for winter cover. And then we move up to a shrub layer. So you see we're kind of graduating a little bit in height as far as what might use that. You know, shrubs, we have wax myrtles. I mean, there's all kinds of hollies and bushes and things like that. So that is going to give you, it's going to expand, instead of just going up, it's going to expand that surface area for, you know, things to use it as shelter, but also for feeding sources. Shrub layer, of course, really popular amongst our Carolina Wren, our rock star. They're just like singing a rock concert when they sing. So shrubs are a really good spot for them to kind of really push that voice out. So the mid-story, kind of this middle range, if you have dogwoods or anything like that, this is also a nice little kind of space in the habitat structure to provide them as they move up to some species that prefer the canopy layers. So, you know, if you have this kind of graduation of stories or trees available or shrubs and plant life, then that's probably going to help out a good bit there. And, you know, when you create these numerous kind of layers or habitats for many wildlife species, take care to think about the thirstier plants, so and the size of root systems. Also, some things to consider would include sunlight and shade, and how that's going to work years after you plant it. So a lot of us, you know, if you plan on staying in one spot for a while, you know, you have a long range plan versus more of a short range one. So, you know, some trees are going to put out bigger, deeper roots, and so it may not be good to bunch certain things up closer to one another. And if one's going to shade out all of that area, you know, it might work for the first 5 years, but then you might have to kind of rethink how you're going to set it up. So when we think about adding plants to your yard, again, that long range plan, so this is just kind of like shelter equals succession. This is, and I'm sorry the photo is not super duper clear, but when you're long range plan, think about 5 years for plants and up to 20 years on shrubs, what you want to see it doing, and even more for longer mature trees, right? Because they're going to be around for a good long while and continue to grow up and up. And so when we're talking about sunlight and how to think about you're adding a canopy and an understory, or maybe you just kind of want that primary successive kind of open area in your yard, and that's fine too, because wildlife is going to use all different portions of this. So, you know, it's something that we can really take advantage of. And so thinking about those diverse landscapes and why they're actually important. If we want to add species richness, so more species actually using the area, we're adding a little bit more interaction and complexity to the food webs, a little more spreading of seeds and pollen, depending on the season, use of space, again, during migration periods or just periods of where their animals are eating a lot or trying to find great spots for mating. And also the more diverse, you know, if you get a fungus or a parasite or a certain insect that just goes to town, or, you know, you just have a whole bunch of deer or something move in and nibble on something, they won't necessarily eat everything. So, you know, the more species that you have, the more likely everything's going to you're going to have something living, something moving on to the next year. So, and again, a big part of it is creating those corridors. So if you have plants that have larger leaves and say some of the more smaller ovate leaves, like a Yopon Hollywood, you know, I mean, that's going to kind of open it up to use for different species of insects and birds and mammals as well. But all of that is going to create basically a green corridor where they feel they can pass safely without getting predated upon, or have access to food and water, and be more encouraged to visit those spots more frequently because they feel protected. So that's just something to think about. Another thing to consider too, and I'm not saying this is your yard, but, you know, think about some of the favorite birding spots that you go to, right? And there's certain ones we know we have, you know, habitat specialists, right? So like, for instance, if I go to a pine forest, I'm almost 99.9% sure I'm going to hear a pine warbler, okay? So if you think about where these birds in the canopy or the story, where you actually might find them. So this is not up here. These are just up in the white portion of the screen so that you can read the names. That's not because the worm-eating warbler is not flying at that altitude all the time hanging out. So it's just kind of like if you were to take that and put it in that section of the tree. So like, you know, our northern bobwhite, mourning dove, that's more primary succession, more open habitat they prefer. And then you get more into this mixed area and you start to have vireos, tanagers. I know it says black-capped chickadee, just excuse that. You could just think of our chickadees that we have. Carolina wrens, tufted titmice. And then when you start to get more into the more mature trees, and again, when we say more mature, we're allowing them to age. So some of those trees are softer because of decay. And so that opens it up for more activity with woodpeckers and ovenbirds and birds that really have a very loud call because they have to be able to shout and make sure it gets through the timberline here. But the habitat requirements are basically they need shelter from above and below. They need a very nutrient-rich food source. Suitable nesting areas, so that could be cavities, tree branches, ground nesting, whatever they prefer, and enough breeding territory per season, so migrants versus residents. And so with such a great diversity of bird species, habitat actually helps us narrow down who we expect to find. But due to a difference in food sources, nesting needs, and behavioral characteristics, birds are going to choose those different habitats to readily meet their needs in a time where the energy, you know, is at a premium. So again, during mating periods and during just before migration and stuff. So safety in plain sight is usually pretty imperative for birds to be reproductively successful. But that also applies to mammals and other animals, reptiles, amphibians, things like that. They need to kind of be able to see what's coming, but also be able to interact with one another. So the competition for, you know, resources such as nesting areas, food, water, and space it is really high during migration periods for birds in spring and fall, as well as some of our mammalian species as well. So, and there's always overlap, so just keep that in mind. And just to kind of give you an example, a little bit more in depth on that. So this I actually got from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's a fantastic website all about birds. But when they talk about landscapes that, and this is the reason I swear I'm gonna move on from this, but the reason I'm kind of harping on having different age and diversity of trees and shrubs and bushes and structure in general is, you know, the landscapes with a mosaic of young and mature forest offer habitat for different birds at different stages of their lives. So their needs are going to change. And here's two species that are highlighted. So for instance, the golden winged warbler, they nest in young forests, but then they move their fledglings to older forests to feed on insects before the first migration. So they're still using the forest, but at different times of year. Whereas wood thrushes, they'll nest in mature forests, and then they'll move their fledglings to younger forests to feed and feast on berries and fruits. So that's why we like to have a little bit of diversity, because it's, you know, it's kind of like you, when you go into town, you have certain spots you like to hit, but you have that spot you hang out in. So that's just a little bit of the argument for having some diversity and thinking about a long-range plan. So now I've just kind of selected a large handful of certain species to just ask you to consider, and I try to pick them, you know, for what they offer, but also try to vary the season that they really succeed in. So what we have right here is star sedge, and I'm sure most of you have probably seen it. And the benefits of this is it's a great winter interest plant. So in the wintertime, you get these, it's just really good ground cover. A lot of animals, you know, we use it again in corridors, but also with these little seeds over here. They're good for deer resistant plantings. I know a lot of folks are like, how do I keep the deer out? Granted, deer will vary by individual as far as how effective you are at keeping them out, but you know, it tends to be one they're not as much of a fan of. Revisiting the idea of water runoff in your yards. If you're trying to create rain gardens, these are great plants to kind of add to a rain garden. It might help slow and pull some of that water there. It's going to thrive in those more wet areas. And it's really nice because it attracts songbirds, because it's also going to be a nice little hiding spot for a lot of insects. So if you have a part of your yard where the, you know, the fertilizer and everything seems to run down, this area is a good kind of stopgap or erosion control for, you know, taking care of that. So just note that, you know, many of us, when we think about target species, we seem to view mammals overall as unwanted visitors, but, you know, established plants that are drought tolerant, pest resistant, and unpalatable to deer and other herbivores are going to, you know, hopefully not keep deer hanging in your particular area, but it may also provide interest for other species like different rabbits and things like that that are going to be hanging around your area, foxes, where they can find other food sources. So I just kind of want to point out again, think about who you want to come to your yard and how these plants might allow them to interact with one another. But it is nice to have something that's not always constantly getting mowed down by feeders. I do know that. So another thing to think about would be blue stem, and that's the one I have in my background all behind me right here. Really super low maintenance, great for erosion control, and you don't have to have an entire field like this. You can do clumps along a fence line in a corner, maybe in an area of the yard you don't use as often, and this will thrive and be great. It's also really good for windy areas, so it'll grow up about 5 to 8 feet. So if you're trying to find an idea for a more native privacy fence, or in an area that's going to also help that water runoff, it's really actually really beautiful. They're called blue stem because I couldn't get a plant picture of it too close, but depending on how the light hits it, it really varies its color, and it's just, I find it extremely beautiful. Purplish to reddish green with upper green sheaths. I put that up there to describe it because if you've ever been up close to it, it really does just kind of catch you. But it starts to, kind of bloom and flower in the fall and the winter time. So it will give you a little bit of something happening in your garden or your yard in the fall and winter time, and it is deciduous. And I'm sorry, I guess I didn't fix that spelling in there. But it is a deciduous grass, and you can actually, when it dies off, you can kind of cut it and trim it, and then it'll come back fresh for the next season, which is really nice. But, the seed heads are great for attracting our songbirds. It provides cover for our pollinator larvae, and also for small mammals like, little rabbits, moles, rats, anything else that's going to come into your yard. But those things are also feeding reptiles and other species too, hawks and things like that. So just remember that. But this is also, I've seen little frogs hang out in this area, and toads, they like this spot just as well. So blue stem is just a really inclusive native grass to put in your yard, and it's, like I said, it's very beautiful. Beautyberry, I just can't say enough about beautyberry. I'm so psyched. I was just telling Charlie earlier, I went to the Purple Pepper and got me a giant beautyberry plant. It's already berrying, and I'm in love with it. But this is great for winter interest. Again, the berry clusters are just breathtaking. I love the coloration of them, that beautiful purple. I know it says magenta, but I don't feel like that does it justice. And the leaves are very showy, in my opinion. Robins and thrashers, brown thrashers, cardinals, towhees, mockingbirds, finches, and woodpeckers, they love the berries on this thing. This is something that's going to be almost as active as your bird feeder if you have one like this in the yard, especially because it's a hard season to find a lot of food. But some of the foliage, you have deer, sometimes possums. Well, opossums will snack on anything, right? We know that, so that's not really but just to kind of show you who visits, foxes and raccoons, you'll see some of those that'll be attracted to this. And, this is one that, even though, it kind of berries more in the fall, the leaves on it throughout the year are going to be absolutely beautiful. So, it's just something to think about. Another thing, if that doesn't tickle your pickle, there's a chemical compound similar to DEET that's been found in the foliage by researchers, and it's thought it can be used as a natural insect repellent from mosquitoes and gnats. So, I don't know if you want to take some of the leaves and kind of just rub them on your arms while you're gardening if something out there is, or maybe a small test spot first, make sure you don't have a reaction, but something to kind of keep everything from nibbling at you. That might be an advantage too. But again, this is just a few ideas for some winter interest plants. And another one, witch hazel, which I'm sure you've seen before. These leaves are a pretty telltale sign. Once you see those, pretty good sign for witch hazel. So the leaf is really pretty in the fall, and it blooms in the fall and the winter. And we actually, if you're thinking about nighttime pollinators, so this is one I'd include if you're thinking about, I know we've talked about birds, bees, moths, things like that, but the nighttime pollinators are also something that feeds our bat species in North Carolina. And our bat species are struggling from white nose syndrome and also extreme loss of habitat. So planting some things that would attract, nocturnal moths and species that come out at night, especially in the wintertime, is also going to be providing a good food source for our bat species that are flying around trying to help us with the insect control. Wild turkeys love to eat the seeds of this plant, and deer will browse the leaves a little bit. But this is, if you ever had, the face masks, or this is good astringent. It's good for skincare properties, which comes from the leaves. This is a plant that likes really well-drained soils. It can be 10 to 20 feet tall. So when you're planning ahead where to put it, where it has room to kind of expand, that's something to think about there. And some of them can just spread just as wide. So give it wide berth wherever you're going to plant this particular crop here. I call it a crop if you want to use it for the astringent properties of this plant. One that'll bloom in the spring. It's a really beautiful tree. And again, this is something if you're thinking long range, what are we going to do? What would I like to leave behind? Kind of a legacy tree. Black cherry would be perfect. So, but there are some caveats here I want to share, but it'll bloom nice in the springtime. You'll get the fruit from July through August. And here we have a picture of some of the fruits that are available down there. And it's just the way that the branches extend outward. It provides a lot of nice perching territory for many different birds or animals that are going to use it, spreads them out. They're not too clustered together. So you can see robins and mockingbirds and grosbeaks, vireos, orioles, waxwings, and woodpeckers, tanagers, wild turkey, and quail all love black cherry. This is also a very nice host for many butterflies. A lot of the adult butterflies will eat the nectars from the spring flowers, but also think, species like this that have nice leaves, like near the berries, you can kind of see it. But this is something, again, leaf cover also equals insect protection. So it's something that the more leaf cover you have, it increases your insect diversity, which is going to increase the diversity of animals that are going to be super interested in coming near this tree or interacting with it because it's more food source that's there. So again, that plant foliage, we're creating more insect holding leaf area there. This fruit is actually made into jams and it's eaten. Don't eat it ripe from the actual tree. The leaves and the stems and the seeds are poisonous to humans. So if you're one of those that likes to go out and just have the yard be edible, just take caution on that. So, it's just a great overall food source for many different creatures and that are using your yard, again, as a corridor or at the base of it in the mid canopy and up at the leaf level. Purple coneflower, I love these guys. I got a couple of them. I can always use some more, so I'm on the lookout. But this is a nice summer, fall flowering plant. I know they're flowering right now. Beautiful perennial. I have had some bees and I have seen some beautiful butterflies. Can't tell you the species. I gotta get a lot better at identifying those. But, they say goldfinches really enjoy this. So this is something that if you are setting up a pollinator garden, I know that there's all kinds of plans. And I think, they like you to plant in odds. So you like 3 to 5 and you just kind of cluster them up. And that seems to be really helpful for attracting things to a specific area. Although you might notice it's slightly deer resistant. I feel like that could be stuck on any single plant. So if they're hungry enough, they're going to go for it. But in this garden, you see they kind of have them all clustered in an area. They make great if you want to kind of border your garden out to try to attract bees and butterflies. And then you can have another plant planted close. That's also something for interest for them to give them just it's almost like setting up a nice little buffet line for them, right? So think about it like that. If you were a butterfly or a bee, how would you like to use that area? Do you really want to have to travel a vast space between food sources? Maybe too much work. So just think about that. But purple coneflower, beautiful, easy to get a hold of. Those 4-sided achenes are really attractive to birds. And if, once it dies, you can just pick that off, deadhead it, let it fall in there, and it'll kind of replant itself. So really great to have. Another thing to think about, so we've been talking about trees and shrubs and plants that we could put in clusters, but vines are super important to a lot of reptile species, amphibians, but as well as birds and pollinators. So this is one that'll bloom April through July, but also it'll have another resurgence in late summer, early fall, so around this time, depending on where you are. And if you like hummingbirds, this is pretty good mimic for a lot of your hummingbird feeders here. So this is one that really attracts them. So when you're thinking about the types of pollinators, maybe do have a hummingbird feeder close by to this type of flower to try to, attract them, but also this is a flower with that red that they see and they come right to it, but it'll kind of solidify, hey, this is where I need to go when I want food. So you can kind of start establishing that as a territory for your hummingbirds. And it's a great food for the spring azure butterfly larvae, for those of you that are butterfly enthusiasts there. But the berries are eaten by songbirds, and you will get some snacking on by deer, but there's solutions. You can kind of put up a nice trellis there, something to give it something to climb or to crawl. That's another thing though, is that it needs support as it grows, because it can grow up to 15 feet. And just when you're planting it, just keep that in mind, that you need to provide continuous support. If you don't want this growing on the side of your house, maybe think of a trellis or some sort of an arbor or any way to kind of hold and contain it, because it is a pretty good climber. But has non-fragrant flowers. You know, it also is just really good fall bird food as well. Elderberry, I'm sure with people getting colds and flus, we've all been hearing about elderberry, I'm sure. So they have these really beautiful, you know, kind of tiny lemon scented white flowers. In June, you probably saw a lot of them in bloom. Honestly, they're in a lot of wild areas as well. So it's pretty easy to find. The purplish blackberries are edible. They make it into syrups and things for sore throats or for helping you recover from flus. It's kind of reduces that, is it the convalescent period, I think they call it. So, but those berries, they feed a lot of insects and songbirds, or the leaves will feed the insects, songbirds, mammals, you know, and attracts a lot of pollinators. This, as you see in this particular mature elderberry bush here, it provides great nesting cover. So even mammals will get up underneath these bushes and nest, but also just for birds coming and grabbing the snacks and things that they need. It's just a really, really great source of food, but also for a great corridor. It's a great area to be able to move to and feel protected about. Keep in mind the long range, this is one that'll grow 9 to 12 feet tall. So you want to make sure that you give it some space. It is woody and it has these arching, spreading forms, and I think it's relatively easy to propagate, if I'm not mistaken. So you can kind of move it, you know, take cuttings of it and move it to different portions of the yard there. So it's just for plant diversity. It increases our insect diversity, and it's a great host plant for a lot of things. So, and again, for you can make your own syrups for the fall. Try to not include, folks, that if you have ponds or if you already have water fixtures in your yard. I know it's easy to see in a lot of our local lakes and ponds and drainage ditches some of the non-native species or invasive species that are there. But some to consider would be a native pickerel weed. So if you have a drainage ditch or an area of your yard that just stays swampy or super wet all the time, consider adding some pickerel weed and see how well it does. I mean, you may end up creating habitat for a lot of amphibian species and a great little area to collect water for some of our mammals and our birds, as well as our reptile species, you know, I guess when we're not in a drought. So you can still try to utilize that. The stalks on these pickerel weeds, we often see dragonflies attaching to them. They'll put their eggs on them. You'll see damselflies in the areas as well. These nice purple kind of cones will attract birds, and you know, frogs will get down into the actual leaves and use that particular area as a space for protection against predators. But again, if you have an area that stays wet long enough, if you have some vegetation like this to create some shade, you may even get some frog or toad eggs. So that's something to think about too. So, but it'll fruit in the fall and the summertime. So that's also something really nice, that once you have it there, you know, as long as it's a wet area, you can still provide food for a lot of wildlife. So spiderwort, this is one that, you know, most people probably already know. They have it in, you can put it in hanging baskets to add layers. So, you know, say you've already got some ground cover, you've got some trees and some shrubs, you know, hanging baskets are a nice way to cheat, where you don't have to have a big stalk or a giant, you know, sorry, what am I thinking of? Roots or any kind of a stump in between. In a hanging basket, you can bury them at different heights, and that will also be great little kind of floating oases for hummingbirds or pollinators or other birds to visit. So this is T. virginiana, and that's native to parts of North Carolina. So it's great for attracting bees and pollinators. This is also one that's super easy to propagate. So if you're, you know, trying to think about, hey, what can I give to friends and family? Try giving them some starts of spiderwort and encourage them to put them in their yard. I mean, that's a great way to share natives with others, and it's literally zero work on their part, because all you have to do is pass it off and they hang it somewhere, and then you're creating habitat in yards that you're affecting through your friendships there. So, but you know, they must be shaded for most of the day, so that's something to make sure that you pay attention to how much sun certain parts of your yard get through the day. And it's also one that you can bring indoors if you need to. So that's something most people don't have a problem with bringing it indoors, but I've seen little anole lizards in here. Definitely get some little frogs in there in some areas where it gets a little bit more wet. But it's beautiful when it flowers, and I like the leaves. It does kind of look like a grass, but it has that kind of bicolor between the yellow and the green. So I think it's a really nice addition to anybody's yard or hanging baskets or inside. Sparkleberry. This is one that if you ever go out hiking while you're birding, you come across this a lot, I'm sure. So, those berries provide good winter food. It'll bloom in the spring and the summertime, which is a good way to see it. But that leaf is really the telltale sign there, because it does kind of have a little bit of a sheen to it there. But the bark is something that mammals and deer, they'll kind of nibble at that in the wintertime. Beautiful foliage in the fall. It's great for butterflies as far as a nectar plant, and apparently the Henry's elfin butterfly really like to snack on it for their larvae or the larvae food. So they'll just go through all the leaves. They really enjoy it. But this is one that as a black bear is moving through the forest and areas like that, it's a great snack for them. Wild turkeys, grouse, other small mammals. It's not, the flowers are down there, so they're like these nice little upside down bells that are hanging. When you see it in the fall or the winter, it's not a particularly showy plant, but it does provide a little bit of leaf cover, and it just, I don't know, I think it's a really good winter cover source, and it's great connecting that corridor for a lot of different species that are moving, but it's also perfect for bee species. So just something else to think about. This is one that doesn't get especially large, so you can kind of control it and maintain it in certain areas of your yard if you're just looking for a smaller kind of shrub or tree to put in your yard. And I'm sorry, I know I'm moving fast. Like I said, I'll provide this stuff to you later. But red maple, this is one we see everywhere, and there's a reason it thrives here, because it really matches with a lot of our our drainage conditions, as well as the way that we get water around here and our temperatures. But beautiful, like I think you're familiar with a red maple, you know that at least one part of the tree is going to be red in any season. So it may be the stem, it may be the leaves. So that's just something to watch out for. But I just, a maple leaf is just something that adds a little bit of flair to your yard. So, will fruit or produce the kind of the nut in the spring, and in the winter and early spring is when you'll get these beautiful flowers through here. Great for our caterpillar species and attracting bees and pollinators. I've seen birds that like to perch up in here, and they like to eat the seeds that it provides. And of course, deer are gonna nibble on it as well. But it's just it's a very solid source of food for a lot of our species here. But also, again, you're creating that structure and that canopy. So you're giving them that middle range is what you're occupying. So if you're thinking about your 5 to 15-year plan, you're factoring in a red maple. Also think about the width and what kind of space it's going to take. And then maple leaf viburnum is another good one. So it has this beautiful kind of trilobal leaf down here. And I know most people think leaves of 3, but it's just the actual shape of the leaf, so not 5 like on a maple leaf. And it'll produce these really good black and blue berries in the fall as well as the summertime. And these nice little showy spring flowers and these clusters that you see here. Very popular with songbirds and turkeys, squirrels. Yeah, we know our squirrels are suffering, right? But squirrels, just something else to maybe get them off the bird feeders. And, the deer will come by and they will nibble on them. They're right in the browse line there. So, wild viburnum is also a really good plant, maple leaf viburnum, if you want something that's going to just add a little bit of distinction to your yard, something to make it look a little different. Okay, and then we have the ironwood, or what people call American hornbeam. And so the leaves are really pretty on this one in the fall. And early, spring is when you'll get these blooms. And if you can see them, they're like these little trailing, just hanging flowers. It's almost like somebody's got a necklace there of flowers. Perfect host plant for specific butterfly species. The buds and the seeds are actually eaten by a lot of songbirds. Of course, if you happen to have turkeys in your areas, foxes and squirrels. So when we say foxes, yes, red foxes, but probably more likely our gray fox, our native fox species, which actually climbs trees. So that's something to think about. And the young ironwoods, as they're starting to grow, that bark, the inner bark, beavers will actually, they'll nibble on the bark, and they'll trim it and cut portions of it to drag branches in to start making their dams and areas there. But rabbits like to nibble on it as well. And this is one that just when it extends, again, it's great cover and shelter for wildlife. So it's food, shelter, it's a lot of the things that we need. And then we have Carolina cherry laurel. I know we've seen these probably in a few places because I know a lot of people get looking at it really closely and they try to associate it with wax myrtle, but the leaves are a bit broader and longer on here. Excuse me. And then you have these nice little kind of just explosions of flowers. Each little bud is starting to produce several different flowers off of it. And it just, between the leaf cover and the flowers, it's really great host plant for a lot of butterfly species. So caterpillars can hide on the underside of those leaves and then immediately crawl out and get a lot of food from the leaves that they eat their way through. And then when they fall off of that leaf because they've eaten it all, they have another one to catch it. So, and then between the pollinators using those, the nectar from those flowers. And again, great for songbirds. This is about a mid-sized shrub here, so it's not anything that is going to take up a huge amount of space, and it's something that can be easily trimmed back. I will tell you though, this one is poisonous to us, so you don't want to go out and just start eating the berries. Leave that for the wildlife to nibble on. They can handle it, they can digest it. But it is one that, you will find some deer browsing on as well. But it's just, again, these leaves are just really good coverage for a lot of wildlife. And if you're fortunate enough to live in one of your more established neighborhoods and you already have oak trees that are there, I strongly encourage you, red or white oak trees, to try to keep them there if at all possible, because that is one that I know Douglas Tallamy has gone over. It feeds so many nocturnal pollinators and insects that our bat species really respond to, but just in general, our land birds and our resident birds, it provides a lot of food. So this actually supports a good number of insects, which will then in turn support a lot of our birds and even, some of our reptilian species. I didn't include the photo here because I don't want to freak people out, but when we have large hatches of cicadas, they kind of get attracted to oak trees. And so you'll see them up on the bark or at the roots, like kind of the nodes down there. And we've noticed that copperheads like to get right up at the roots of some of these oak trees. And sometimes they will climb just a short distance up the tree because as soon as they hear that cicada or feel that cicada kind of like crackling out of their shell, they're popping out of it, they grab it really quick and eat it. It's like popcorn for them. They love it. So they wait for those emergencies and they seem to know when they're coming. So before you kind of put your hand on one of those trees to rest, just take a good look at what's there to begin with, because I have seen young copperheads blend in perfectly with some of those oak trees, so just be careful. But oak trees, huge for habitat. If you have cavity nesters, if you have those that like to kind of build nests out on the branch, big, strong, sturdy, supportive branches that space things out and allow great perching territory for announcing yourself to a mate or a potential mate. These trees just offer so many benefits, and it's just so hard to find upper canopy trees that really support a lot of different species. And bears, oak trees, I know everybody thinks bears, they hang out in caves and things. We actually have bears that will overwinter in trees, like upright standing trees if there's a decent cavity size in there. Of course, raccoons, squirrels, flying squirrels, bats. So a lot of our bats are tree species here on the coast, and so they'll actually hang from some of these areas of the trees if they're close enough to the bark, high enough up where the temperature isn't varying too much because you have enough leaf cover to kind of cut through those breezes, and they get that morning sun, and they just kind of look like dead leaves until they emerge and fly out for their feeding for the night. And you can see the list of everything that it feeds, including hogs and coyotes and deer and squirrels and bear. But this is one that produces a food source in the wintertime that is just vital to a lot of our animals, especially when they're in hot competition for it to get through. So this is also, just like I said, great for nesting. So if you have the opportunity to have an oak tree, or you can make space for it in your yard, in your long range plan, or you're thinking, I thought I'd get rid of it, but maybe I'll keep it, this is one I strongly encourage you to reconsider. There's also been some studies done with squirrels, gray squirrels, regarding whether they prefer white oak acorns or red oak acorns. And honestly, when they bury those acorns, between the white oak and the red oak acorn, they actually produce, there's a chemical that will keep them from being invaded by pests or insects that get up in and burrow through. And I forget which one it is, and I'm sorry, I'm just remembering this now, but one of them will actually start sprouting earlier than another. So squirrels tend to have, when they do all this kind of hoarding and they put it around, they tend to go after the one that will sprout first over the ones that will sprout later, so that they actually can, it's almost like they have perishable acorns that they know when to harvest over the winter season. So that's something else that's really cool too. Wild olive, this is another one that's very nice big kind of leaves there. It produces, food sources in the late summer and early fall. Nice little, explosions of blooms here in the springtime. But, the leaf is all winter long. So again, great cover, small evergreen tree, maybe 15 to 20 feet. Deer may nibble on this if there's not much else out there. But it's also pretty resistant, like moderately resistant, I should say, to salt damage. So here in the coastal plains, depending on how close you live to the ocean, some of those breezes can bring salt, 2 to 3 miles inland. So, that might be affecting some of your gardens depending on how the coastal breeze is affected as well. But, great cover, and the birds will eat and mammals will eat some of the fruits too. American holly, you probably want to put this in an area where you're not walking too commonly because you don't want to get snagged by those leaves. But even though the berries are actually inedible to humans, they're a great food source in the fall and wintertime for a lot of different bird species. Deer, small mammals will eat them, but really birds do really, really well on them. But this particular one here, it can grow 40 to 60 feet tall. So that's something to really consider. Now, granted, that's under the optimal conditions where it has plenty of sun, plenty of space to move. So, when I say can grow that high, depending on where it's planted and how much sunlight it gets, it may kind of dwarf out a little smaller than that. So, but if it's not protected against cold winter winds or straight sunshine, that's going to also kind of affect how big it's going to grow. But this is one that feeds a number of different species, and honeybees actually like the tiny white flowers that it provides. So it'll bloom, between April and June. And it's a really, and the male flowers, believe it or not, so this is dioecious, so the male flowers will have flowers clustered in 3 to 12, and female flowers will have them solitaries or in 2s and 3s. So just thought that was really cool for when you watch them bloom. And Yopon holly, this is a really good one. I know that some people will make, leaves or tea from the bark, and you're supposed to be able to, hallucinate and see a higher power, but really it's Ilex vomitoria for a reason. It makes you throw up because of the extremely high caffeine content. So if money's getting tight and you can't get enough coffee at the stores, boil down some bark from the Yopon holly and make yourself a tea there, but be careful with it. But beautiful little flowers. The leaves are just so beautiful. I enjoy them a lot. Great nectar for butterflies. Berries are a good food source. Deer aren't very excited about it. And this is one that you'll actually see growing like on the backsides of dunes in a lot of instances because they're very salt tolerant. But great winter cover, and the color of the bark and the leaves together, I think it's just a really pretty kind of like pastel to add to your tapestry for your yard. And just, sorry, I'm going to run through a few others because I know I'm running low on time here and there's so much to talk about. But high bush blueberry, another really good one. This is the underside of the leaf is kind of hairy. Blooms February to May, these little bell-shaped down-hanging flowers there. This is a shrub, so it is deciduous, so it will lose its leaves. Give it about 3 feet of space, and it can grow as high as 12 feet, but great for birds and mammals and butterfly larvae. And the berries, you can actually eat them fresh or you can cook them, so whatever your preference is. Muscadine grape, I know a lot of folks are probably, oh, not muscadine, but I know that, for instance, like if you have any tortoises or non-native turtles, or whatever, turtles love the leaves of these. So do a lot of insects. The grapes feed a lot of animals, but those vines, those big, thick, woody vines will actually hold water throughout the year. And in certain seasons, you can actually kind of cut through it in the springtime and actually get water from the vine as it's transporting water and nutrients through. So this vine, again, creates habitat, a structure that small lizards and birds and other little mammals can use. And that's another kind of corridor that's not necessarily on the ground, but enables them to travel safely between a food and water source. So highly edible berries. If you ever had muscadine wine, I don't know how many wine connoisseurs we have. This is where that's coming from. But it's just great nesting cover as well. But again, this is one that you're going to want to give it something to climb. It's something to be really supportive of because it is a climber and it will take off. So wax myrtle, I know we're pretty all familiar with that. It's also a nice little evergreen shrub that if you like to prune and really like, make it beautiful, you can, or if you just want to let it go wild, you don't have to touch wax myrtle. It does everything. It's great winter cover. It'll help with, you know, as a wind barrier, great host plant for butterflies. Birds love these. So if you're looking for yellow rump warblers, little butterbutts in the fall, look for wax myrtle. They really like to go in there. They're very efficient at digesting waxy fruits. So this is one too. The leaves are very aromatic. Some people say they may have mosquito repellent properties. I think those people are just dreamers. Nothing keeps those bloodsuckers away. But this is one that just, it's beautiful in the fall and the winter as well. Provides a great food source for when animals need it. Pokeweed. So blooms in the summer and fall. These black purplish berries are a really good food source for a lot of songbirds. It can grow 6 to 10 feet high, and it is an herbaceous perennial. I wouldn't eat the berries. They say that humans have a medium reaction depending on who you are. Slightly poisonous to us. It's just not, our digestive system's just not set up for it. But, you know, a lot of small mammals will eat the seeds as well. And again, big leaf cover will actually add to the insects. Cardinal flower, very attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies, kind of like little red Roman candles going off in your yard. Adds some new dimension. So it's leggy, and then it has the bloom kind of on the tippy top. So it'll add, again, another just layer above, hopefully something that you have there to attract them. And it's really pretty August through November. July and October, you'll have, you know, white, pink, or red terminal spikes, depending on what you decided on. This is a really great way to border out your pollinator garden, you know, or to just kind of add a little bit of a difference in height. Partridge berry, this is a really good lower ground cover to, you know, about not even quite mid-level shrub. So it's kind of like a creeping delicate vine that'll kind of pattern on itself. It's almost like a carpeting of an area, little woody herb, and it produces tiny little white flowers, nice little berries. But this is also an alternative to your, you know, non-native grass species. If you're looking for something that's going to kind of do a little bit of erosion control, it's great for shade gardens, border fronts, and a variety of animals enjoy the berries that it produces. But also, again, you're creating habitat, a little bit of a corridor for things that move up underneath. Southern magnolia is another really nice one to have in the yard, very aromatic. These nice cones produce several fruits per cone there, and it's just really good for severe weather cover, great for attracting pollinators, and really good for your power bills. It's a good shade tree. So it's a nice broadleaf evergreen tree. And I think NC State has a publication about how to propagate magnolias efficiently or successfully. And then eastern red cedar, this is one that's very tolerant to salt. It's a great wind buffer, privacy screen, great winter cover, perfect for nesting. They can grow 30 to 40 feet tall, and they have these berries that you can kind of rub the color off. It's this galoshes kind of blue berry in the fall and the winter, and they are dioecious, so there are separate male and female plants. The male will produce a teeny tiny, what looks like a pine cone, but they're very beautiful. You see juniper hairstreak butterflies around them. Lots of songbirds and small mammals will use them for cover as well, but they have kind of like a scaly leaf, so something that's a little bit different. Sassafras is another great one. This is easy to spot because they'll have different like, you know, the mitten leaf, and then they have like a glove, and then just a straight edge, regular looking leaf. But this is one that has a very deep taproot. So if you're thinking about planting a lot around sassafras trees, think again, because it's a bit of a water hoarder. But it's great for pollinators. The fruit is eaten by just about everything you can imagine. So it's a great food source for that. I've also heard that you can make the leaves into a tea, and it helps with gout relief. So there's something else there, a nice little edible kind of in the yard there. So, and then just briefly going over the last few things of ways to enhance habitat in your yard. If you can include nest boxes, I say do, because, you know, in addition to your plants that will have seasonal changes and fluctuations, you know, nest boxes can add diversity to your yard for a number of things that call it home. And it's low cost to you, just some seasonal maintenance to make sure you clean it out every year and that it looks good and homey. But you might also think about providing a little bit of food source, or these are bee houses. So when I see a lot of these on sale in bird places, but what's important is that these holes, that they are smooth throughout, because if a bee goes in there and it's not smooth, that wood will shred its wings. And if you don't have wings, you can't be a really good bee, right? So then you're just fodder for something else. So maybe consider something like that. And I'm sure you've seen the importance about our pollinator species, but up to about a third of the food you eat is directly attributed to the work of a pollinator. So, some of the foods like squash and apples, cucumbers, watermelons, berries, those are all because of pollinators. If you like to have a nice margarita every now and again to unwind, bats help to pollinate those. So, just kind of think about that. They're really helpful, and without them, the way we think about produce and food in general would be changed. And I just want to give a brief shout out to snags and down logs. So almost every part of a dead tree at varying stages of decomposition can be used by wildlife. So a variety of wildlife use snags and down logs. They use it for roosting and nesting, foraging, perching, and territorial displays. Over 45 bird species and over 20 mammal species have been documented to use snags in the southeastern US. And when a snag falls over, it becomes a down log. So, they're one and the same. And it provides cover and foraging areas for many reptiles, amphibians, invertebrates, and small mammals. So that's another thing to kind of consider. In this picture, those are two baby gray foxes that you're seeing there. We know, like, for instance, woodpeckers will use them, great crested flycatchers, bats will use them, flying squirrels, gray squirrels, green anoles, owl species, but also ruffed grouse. They like to use them as a mating call area, but you'll get a lot of black bears, foxes, weasels, bobcats, voles, moles, and then you'll get toad species, different snake species, even turtle species will use some of those down logs as well. It's kind of an area to perch or an area to climb up. And decaying logs will attract the insects, fungi, lichen, and moss that provide a food source for other wildlife. And as those logs are decaying, they then, they replenish the soil. So they're kind of like a nutrient time capsule that's going to, act as a nurse log and provide fertile soil for a new tree sapling to kind of come up. And so over 20 bird species and 50 mammal species and many different species of reptiles and amphibians actually use those down logs. So, if you have the space and you have the ability to save them, just keep in mind what you're attracting with them. If you're okay with having those species in your yard, that's something to consider. And then the last thing I have to bring up is, again, if you have room for snags or downed areas, maybe consider the season of use for your yard. So, when I was growing up, we called our no-mow areas wild areas. So fallow plots, is there an area that you can just kind of leave alone for a year, 2, 3 years and see how the vegetation changes and see how wildlife uses it? If not, maybe try to consider doing that with gardening. Maybe not cleaning it up and pruning it, but letting it kind of grow over, switch up a little bit of the nutrient feed that comes to that area, no-till or mow in that particular area, and just try to see if, by doing it during different seasons, if that affects what it attracts to your yard, if it provides good cover, food source. If you want to experiment with timing with a specific area of your yard, I think it might really be beneficial to see what it brings as far as wildlife and what it can sustain. And I know I went way over time, and I'm sorry, and there's just so much more to say, but if y'all have any questions.
You're good. I had a couple comments.
Yeah.
From my experience here, since I'm leaving, I ought to leave it with you.
We're still not sure about it.
I crop quite a few elderberries. They're along the fence, the privacy fence, 6 feet, and then my garden's there.
Mm-hmm.
They get pretty tall, and I keep knocking them back. And I make syrup from the berries, and I leave a lot for the birds. They're always busy on. But the thing is, the roots are probably longer than the plant is tall, and they just creep everywhere. They pop up in my garden beds, and they'll be big, thick things, and I have to cut them out and pull them out. And they're really nasty. They're just trouble. But I still grow them. And something else. Oh yeah, the cherry laurel. Charlie gave me one. I've had it planted, and it's getting to be about 5. Well, it's at 6, 7 feet tall now. And when's it going to bloom, or is this a male-female thing?
It's supposed to bloom early spring. And I don't know if yours. How long you've had it for? You said up to 7 years.
No, Charlie. What, 4 or 5 anyway? Yeah.
Huh.
anyway, it never has. I have a persimmon tree, and it started as just a start plant, and it's about 18 feet up in the air now. But anyway, I've been waiting on it, and this spring I looked up and saw some blooms just in the top, and they didn't quite make the persimmon, but they started to form it, but they dropped off. But
Yeah.
anyway, that had a good start.
You know, somebody told me at a nursery that this is a strategy they use for tropical plants, but I don't know how well it would work for natives, where they have a period of stress on the plant so they don't expose it to a lot of water, if they can control that aspect and things, and it kind of shocks them, and then you come back with like fertilizer for them, and then all of a sudden it just starts fruiting or blooming.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that would work for your cherry laurel, but it might be something to try, or maybe I don't know, but they should do pretty well on their own. So there must be something that maybe it's not getting enough of, or it's not producing, blooms.
Being on the farm in West Virginia for some years with raising my daughters, they weren't allowed to have any, but elderberry wine's very good wine.
Yeah.
Made a lot of it. But poke salad, you mentioned pokeweed, and but the early shoots are really good. We'd eat them in salad.
Yeah, I've heard that too. A lot of people really enjoy those.
And one of my favorite things to do, I'll shut up. One of my favorite things to do, you mentioned the coral honeysuckle, which I have several places. The thing I love most is to watch the bumblebees, even carpenter bees. The bumblebees try to get in that tube. They'll work on it and they'll work on it. I'm thinking, now how are you going to stay there and realize you're not going to get in there?
You see that little bumblebee butt. Well, when you bring up vines, that's another point too. I know a lot of people are concerned about the vines killing their trees or what they already have established. So if that's a concern of yours, make sure you put in a trellis or something, give it a way to kind of divert it. And then that way, if you get a few tendrils that wind that way, you can kind of trim those off or kind of tame it and train it to go another way, just in case. Because I've heard mixed reviews about people say, oh, muscadine will kill your trees, and it will hold on and grow these little kind of rootlet hairs from the vine to hold on and grip. But that just really depends on, I guess, what kind of tree you have, but also just in general, how long you're watching it. I know it'll knock the bark off of like pine trees and stuff like that, but that doesn't necessarily kill a pine tree.
Dr. Bullard, who we lost this year, AJ, he had several species of trumpet vine, or excuse me, I just lost it. Coral trumpet, coral trumpet vine, honeysuckle, whatever. But anyway, he would take a 6x6 post and put it in the ground. It'd be about 7 feet high, maybe 7 to 8 feet high. And he had those out in the open. And so it would grow up and it couldn't go anywhere, so it'd fall back down. So all he had to do is prune the bottom of it all the time when he mowed around it.
Oh gosh.
But I mean, that contained it, and that's where it was. It was pretty cool. Nice. Things like that. That's what I learned while I've been here all these years.
Wow, we're still not ready to let you go. So
yeah, I'm gonna miss y'all, and I'm gonna I hope our membership, keeps supporting Charlie and helping out. But anyway, it's been a good run. I'm gonna miss it very much so.
We're gonna miss you, that's for sure.
Yeah, me too. I'm gonna miss you all.
We'll go ahead and wrap this up. I want to say, and if Becky agrees with this, that if people think of questions later on, I want to pass out, I'll send Becky's email address to everyone, and she will, if she agrees, to field any questions she has.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll do that. And also I will, in the follow-up on this, when I send out to all members, I'll send out a link some way or another that people that have missed it can go ahead and listen to it. So I will do that also.
Oh, great.
So
that's good.
So at this point, I'm going to stop the recording. We can continue to talk here if we want to, but I'm gonna stop the recording. So-
And